Hello everyone and welcome to Cappuccino with HR. My name is Rudi Bauer and after 40 years in business I'm 100% sure that the success of companies is directly related to the passion of the people working for these companies. With the Cappuccino of HR we created a format where we really invite people, it's HR leaders, it's recruiters, it's talent acquisition guys, and we're talking about all the different kind of topics, and the range is going from AI of course to new work, to leadership, and all the challenges along the way. Yeah, hello and welcome to another episode of Cappuccino with HR. Today I'm really delighted to have Frank Spilleth with us. Hi, Frank.
Hi, Rudi. Good to be here.
Frank is a design leader. He's really many years in the business, but anyhow, we'll ask you to introduce yourself in a minute. But we had a really nice chat as a preparation for this podcast, and also because I was addressing him, because I think we are talking about a topic which I personally find extremely interesting. So what could HR learn from service design, from product design, from UX, UI? And we have chosen the title on our own. It was Stop Managing People and Start Designing Their Experience. So that is probably the topic we're talking about. So once again, Frank, thank you very much for your time and thanks for being here and welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rudi. I'm happy to be here and happy to join the session, your audience today.
And before we start, I would really ask you to briefly introduce yourself. I mean, there's so many things in your resume and what I wrote on your LinkedIn profile, so probably you can tell the audience a little bit of it.
Yeah, I've been working in the area of design, research and design for 25 years, and I've worked across different various industries, from enterprise to government to nonprofits and retail high tech organizations. I've worked with HR departments and large companies like Intel and Microsoft and other large organizations. And I've also worked with very small organizations, startups as well, like Silicon Valley startups, and then ran my own consulting firm for 23 years as well, and worked with a variety of global clients across various industries, and led projects across all sorts of very interesting things, from redesigning healthcare experiences like MRI redesign to of course, like e-commerce and things like that. And then lately I've been working with AI and LLM voice, generative AI in customer service to scale across government specifically.
And the second question that I have to ask all my guests is, it's called Cappuccino with HR, is what's your favorite coffee?
Since I've just been in Spain, I would have to say the cortado probably, but cappuccino would be the go-to, I think. Like
Really
cappuccino
cool.
with oat milk.
Yeah. Then let's jump into the topic. You've spent more than 2 decades now, and I mean, with service experiences for global organization. If you look back, what have you learned about what truly makes an experience work? Could you put that together in a small summary?
Yeah, it's very basic actually, because if you take a design, what you have with the design is basically a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone who makes decisions about designs has a very great opportunity to influence what happens with that design. So a design these days is an experience that a consumer or employee has. And so you're shaping an experience with your decision. And so fundamentally and very basically, how you make those decisions, the quality of those decisions is where your highest impact is. And we know from decades of experiences, the classic one is Apple, and there are many other classic ones, Netflix, and on and on. We have lots of great examples these days. That the way that you make a good design decision is by staying close to the users of that end experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say stay close, we're talking about getting really close to them, understanding the granularity of their experience, the emotions that are generated within that, but then also the wider kind of relationship that they have with the brand or the experience, or in the case of an employee experience, that journey that exists across different stages, and like really
Mhm.
getting dialed in about that, and then getting very nuanced about what happens within those stages or those moments, and designing those things so they put a smile on people's face.
How important is human intuition, understanding human intuition, if you build a product or service or platform?
The intuition of of you as a decision maker, or of the user, you mean?
I think the user,
The
because at
user.
the end of
Okay,
the
that's easier. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's really important. It's a good question, because it's a basis of all of those great experiences that you can create with good design decisions come down to intuition. And we call it, what is intuition? It just basically means not requiring understanding. Like
Mhm.
intuition, it's like I get how to do it. Like I don't even have to think.
Yeah.
Humans don't like to think because they're so busy. We have this like essentially supercomputer, of a brain, really, that for now is outperforming any, AI type of experience. We think differently and we process differently, but because we're maximizing all our resources all the time, our cognitive resources, the way we think, we don't want to think. We don't want to have to stop and figure things out. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, the way that experiences are designed are by technical business people, people with a lot of thinking, that you sit inside an organization and you do a lot of thinking, and that a lot of thinking almost gets translated into as a puzzle that users are supposed to solve. And users don't want to solve puzzles. They just want to use the thing. They just want to do the thing. They just want to have that experience, and get on with their goals, or get on with enjoying the benefit of the thing that they're doing.
Mhm.
So
Uh,
that's why intuitive is really, really important.
yeah. And I mean, I was a little bit confused myself, and so I ask you this question as well. I mean, I think a lot of people within our audience are probably not familiar with the field. Could you quickly explain the difference between UI, UX, and service design? Because I was confused
Yeah.
sometimes. For me, it was probably sometimes everything the same, and then I found out no, it definitely isn't. So could you give us a quick kind of intro into it?
Yeah, this field is kind of like a scientific field, meaning that it comes from the Department of Cognitive Science, which is psychology and computer science, and things like linguistics, and little anthropology, neuroscience. It's like multidisciplinary, but ultimately it's like psychology and computer science. And it actually started like in World War II. The British developed a Spitfire Marine, which was like a new design of an airplane, because they noticed that the pilots were getting like confused and overloaded, what we call cognitive overload, or like their brains were essentially like they were having to think too much, while they were flying the plane in this dangerous environment. And they cleaned up that those buttons, and that's the UI. So user interface is essentially like the buttons, and the colors and the groupings, and they saw an improvement in those pilots. The pilots all of a sudden started, like, they were able to essentially perform better, psychologically. And that's why in military design today, all of this stuff is standard. And you zoom up to not too long ago, a few years ago, with NASA's Dragon UI, which is a complete, like, radical change in, and when you're dealing with spaceship, you have to be really careful that, the thing doesn't, like, it's like dangerous. It's like someone could like die. So they made it like touchscreen, and that was like a really radical change. So those are UIs. User experience describes everything in and around that, um, that's happening in and around there. And service design then extends that. So service design looks end to end across the whole experience. And so service design is like a new kind of approach to holistically looking at not just UIs, not just UX, but also the whole experience end to end. And that includes looking at employee experience and backstage systems, policies and procedures, and a very much like a systems approach, as opposed to just buttons and just like screens.
Thank you very much. Uh, when I was watching guys in the company or my previous companies talking about customer journeys or employee journeys or candidate journeys. I mean, at the end of the day, it's journeys for humans. So I do not want to distinguish too much between. But we were always starting the discussion. We're always starting with, okay, what are the touch points? Is a real, if you do a journey mapping, what does a well-crafted customer journey include beyond just touch points?
Yeah, this is where service design helps bring that kind of end-to-end view along. So we start with journeys. When we talk about touch points, we're talking about those interactions of the exchange of, like, say, information or communication. Say, like, take a rent-a-car example. As
Mhm.
you're going to, so you're choosing a car and then you go to pick it up, and then you have to get the keys and then sign for the insurance, and then you have to go find the car, and there's signs that point you. These are all touch points along the way, along the journey. So they're actually really important, because you could get confused, or there could be an issue. You might not understand. For example, I was just picking up a rent-a-car, and there was a kiosk and no one was using the kiosk. And I asked them and they said, "Oh, no, you have to have booked through our website directly." But I was using a third-party website. And so the two databases basically don't sync up. So here's
Yeah.
this kiosk. And the result is that you had to wait an hour in line. So,
Mhm.
it's almost, it's a chunk of a waiting time. And you're kind of exhausted by the time you get up to the desk. You're kind of like, it's not a
Mhm.
good experience, right? And so you want to streamline that. You want to move that along. You want to look at that. And so it's really important when you look at a journey, that you're looking at everything, not just, here, pick up your keys, or here, use this website, but more like, what are our systems talking to each other? Is everything working to optimize? When the user goes and collects the car, are the signs clear? Go this way, go down this way, down the stairs, like, it's over here, that kind of thing. Is it clear when to get help? Is it clear when to,
Mhm.
when you're making a decision as a consumer? All these things are really, really important. So looking at them, like, holistically is really critical.
Mhm. And when I mean, you're in the business for decades now. When you compare, if you were looking into studies about users and researches about users, and if you do that today, what is the main differences?
The differences between users and researchers.
No, the difference between users 10, 15, 20 years ago and users today. I mean, was it
All right.
easier to understand them 20 years ago, or is it more complicated
Hmm.
now, or the opposite?
I mean, the difference for users is they've been burdened with a lot more designs that they have to navigate. Now we're in the age of AI, like chatbots and AI assisted workflows and things. So they have to figure that out now. So there's always this figuring out that's a theme with users 10, 15, 20 years ago and today. But I remember when I first got started in the field in late 90s, early 2000s, I remember, doing a usability test. It's a way that we kind of observe, like, an experience to see how people are actually using it. And this guy just stops and he looks at the screen and he says, "I didn't realize how bad this thing was." He says, "It looks like it was designed by a couple of techies that were high on dope." That it was hilarious. And the developer was in the background laughing. But like, these were people who were retired. So they were older users. They were, driving, like, RVs, recreational vehicles, or caravans, like that's kind of there's a community of that in the United States. And so, not like a technical person, not like someone in a job or something, or someone who's retired and is able to kind of see through a design. We'd have users saying, "The layout of this design is not standard." And so and that just surprised me. That seemed really early on for the web, for older users to understand that designs were not supporting their goals. And I think what I've seen with users today is very, very similar. I just recently had heard a user. Again, this was a user interview. So again, it's making better decisions, stay close to the user, right? And so that means a lot of user research. And this user, he was commenting on an AI experience. This is a voice AI, synthetic AI, or voice LLM experience for customer service. And this guy was disabled. Uh,
Mhm.
and he was he was talking about trust, and he was getting very specific about what we call like tone with a voice, AI agent. And it was like, it was that same kind of like, wow, they really know, it's like users, employees, customers, anyone who's having an experience, they know. And I don't think that's changed. It's not that users have gotten, of course, people are more familiar with mobile and they're more familiar with designs, but you still see the same kinds of, it's not like everyone, like people don't collectively get smarter as technology improves because
Mhm.
they're human. Remember, they're just trying to have an experience. They're not trying to figure out UIs, trying to figure out user interfaces, or trying to figure out like, how things are put together. They're just having their experience. And so I
Mhm.
think that stayed the same, and the need to like listen to users has also stayed the same, because that's the only way that we can get quality, design
Mhm.
out of what we're doing.
Mhm. I mean, I mean, understanding humans for me means having data, having access to data, having a kind of a, a interpreting the data right, and then setting the right actions. I mean, with AI now, I think we have access to data. I think we have the world is really open now. Uh, at the end of the day, there is probably role models for good service design and good product design. Is it is it easy to build it now because you can copy and paste it, or is it still a very individual thing which you have to consider to do on your own?
I mean, it's gotten a lot easier to do kind of like prototyping, and now we use like AI prototyping tools in the last couple of years, really just literally in the last year and a half or something. Before that, it was kind of shaky, but the tools have gotten a lot better, in terms of doing digital prototypes of things. I think ultimately, and that extends to AI as well. You can very quickly prototype AI experiences using AI, and you use AI to design for AI. And so that's become really easy. And it's, yeah, I mean, I recently just, put some prototypes together, like, accidentally created a couple of agents and was able to start prototyping like, 6 weeks ahead of schedule kind of thing, like because of AI. And I wouldn't have been able to do that maybe like last year or without AI. So it's just incredible, the tools. But what goes into the prototype is still the same basic. Like you can't like, just expect the current set of tools to tell you what you kind of need to know what the experiences that you need to know what your kind of guardrails are, what your boundaries, what your opportunities are. Essentially, you need to know exactly what users need for that experience in order to do the prototyping and guide the tool. But to spin something up really quickly, yeah, I think it's gotten a lot easier, definitely.
Something where what you could see as the role model out there, a product or service where you say, okay, this could be probably used that, and we are used to use it. I mean, for me, it's we had the discussion when we met the first time. I said, okay, I can't understand if somebody builds a kind of an interface for whatever, a fridge or a washing machine or a car. Why don't we use a kind of a very similar user interface that as that one that we all really can handle now, even if you wake us up at 3 in the morning. I mean, our smartphone, I mean, is really a part of it became a part of us ourselves. Wouldn't it be a clever idea to just copy and paste it
Uh,
into?
it's it's a yeah. I mean, in a sense, you have standardization, and your question is it's like standardization on the one side, and then
Yeah, yeah,
personalization on the other side.
yeah.
And we are moving into a really exciting, I think, era of hyper personalization with AI, in the sense that we can, kind of AI can help understand the context of what a customer or employee is trying to do, and give them specific resources or hints or pointers or touch points that enable their direction forward much more quickly. But I think, like, yeah, the idea of internationalizing an interface, and like Whirlpool did this many years ago. I think so. When I'm talking many years ago, in 1999, 2000 something, at the
Mhm.
beginning of kind of .com, and they went in really deep with exactly what you said. And as a result, and they built a UX practice. And these days, the more advanced, mature organizations are also building service design capabilities. So in the US is a little behind in this area, but they're starting to catch up a little bit more. So you see a lot more, but still nowhere near Europe or the UK in terms of service design understanding and hiring. And use of this like more advanced kind of UX set of tools, this kind of end-to-end systems view. But yeah, it's interesting. I think when it comes to work, making something that works across cultures, it's so important. Even within your country, you'll have varying people. You'll have people from different countries who come there with different, may have different languages, different ideas of how things work, mental models. I worked with someone who is, in a libraries project recently for local government. She was from Iran, and I said, "Can you go and check out this library experience?" And she said, "We don't, the libraries are not free in Iran. So can I do this? This is weird, for me to." And I said, "No, it's free. You can go in and access the space and access the services." And she wasn't familiar even with the idea of free access, so that level of, it's like cultural fit is really, really important. If you're that washing machine that Whirlpool works on, they can make the interface nice and clear and make it simple and have a good experience with it. But to make it fit for a Saudi Arabian like expectation culturally, they would need to have a very large drum, because they wash these robes, and it's like 30, 35, 40 kilos of clothing, where, in Japan, which is really everything's small and tight, and so you have to, there's that level of, it's almost a type of personalization, but at a cultural level, we call it culturalization. So there's, again, it's like making informed decisions based on user data, based on fit. And the same thing for employees. I think we have in HR, we have the heavy hand of HR, really, which stays in a lot of ways disconnected from the employee experience. And I think there's a huge opportunity, even simple things like in the beginning when you're uploading a resume or CV, and ATS systems, which are not based on large language models, on LLMs, right? They're based on largely algorithms and kind of brute force. And they're filtering out a lot of quality candidates. I think this is where we're going to see, I think in the next few years, a huge shift in that, going from this ATS, almost like standard, keyword driven approach, to this LLM driven approach, which allows more deeper understanding of whether a candidate is a good fit or not, because right now ATS can't do that. It's just throwing away talent, and scoring they've added, scoring systems and things like that. They're a little bit better, but still, I think a lot falls through the cracks. And that's to say nothing of the bias that they may perpetuate, or them, like large, long names or so-called foreign sounding names might get filtered out. Or we've had, the Amazon 5 or 6 years ago scrapped a system because it only selected male candidate names. And, so there's all these kinds of things. These are all related to how you design the system. And in service design, we tackle these issues. We look at how, a design or an AI, when it's working with a design, how it's actually navigating these issues, and how it's used to create a more fair experience, a more delightful and a more culturally sensitive experience.
How important is accessibility and inclusive design if it comes to service design? I mean, there was a lot of barriers in the past. Is there a change going on?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of change going on in accessibility, and that kind of extends from that, that idea of almost like cultural fit. Well, disability is in a way a culture, but disability needs to be specifically and legally adhered to. So, for example, European Union just legislated this really strong Accessibility Act, and same with AI. They have a very strong AI Act. So there are regulations that are legal level obligations. But then there's the actual experience. And what you find with, accessibility, disability, inclusion is one of my areas of expertise. And what I find is a lot of people just kind of try and meet the basic, in other words, they try and just let me just give you a door that you can go through. I'll give you a ramp, and then that's it. And they don't think about the quality of that experience, the way they might for a non-disabled like design, they might say like, oh, well, if I'm not thinking about disability, we'll try and make it really good. And when it comes to disability, it's like, oh, just what's the requirement? Let's just make it like, just to meet that and check it off, and so there's a huge area of opportunity for making accessibility more higher quality and actually meeting, and that starts with working with people with disabilities. That's because they are users too.
Yeah.
And so that's really critical. We see like a huge leap forward from companies like Netflix, and is a big one, where they even have diverse acting and hiring policies. Like Airbnb, they'll have like accessible accommodations, a special range of accessible accommodations. Companies like Comcast in the US, which is a large kind of cable internet provider, if you phone their customer support, they have a dedicated support line for people with disabilities. And those representatives understand, they have the sensitivity in order to give that person with a disability an equitable, or fair experience related to their needs. So that there you see that personalization creeping in again, as opposed to that standardization, or that, it's a good experience and everyone will have it. And it's like, well, no, because everyone's needs are slightly different. So how can you scale this kind of, challenge of meeting a specific candidate or employee or customer's needs based on, where they're at, not where you think, where your roadmap is at.
I mean, if you look, I mean, we're talking a lot about data now, understanding, interpreting data, right? What role does emotion play in customer journeys and employee journeys? I mean, a couple of years ago, we tried to solve everything with gamification. There was a lot of tools, and everybody was playing around with gamification, making it like a computer game. What's the role of emotion if we build journeys?
Emotion is so critical. It's another area of expertise for me. So I love your question. It's a great question, actually. I spent many years like publishing and doing experiments in emotion design with the emotion design community. And I would say that emotion, and Forrester Research in the US has done a lot of, they're this big kind of analyst, Gartner or Forrester. Gartner's done a little bit, Forrester went really deep into it, of the business issue of emotional differentiation. So what we call emotional value. And emotional value is critical in the employee experience and critical for HR professionals to understand, because it's scattered throughout the journey, the employee journey, and it exists inside of those touch points that we talked about. It's like, so when there's that kiosk at the car rental, it's like, why can't I use this? And I'm like, oh, I'm waiting here, and there's so many people that left that queue, that line. They just disappeared because they couldn't. There was a family behind that had like a small child, and they said, "Oh, we'll just get a taxi." And I was like, "Well, what happens now?" Because a lot of that particular car rental place They said when I booked that there was no refund, that you were paying up front. A lot of them don't do that. You can just throw it. So what kind of emotion does that create? What, and so it's very similarly, it's like I talked about with the ATS system. I had an experience recently where an HR recruiter reached out to me and said, your experience is perfect because you've worked in the public sector, and we're like a commercial, it's like a large supermarket basically. And we're basically like a government, like public sector, but we don't get a lot of people, service designers who have experience in government. So you're like perfect, and so I said, okay, well, sounds like a great challenge. And they said, well, just upload your, CV to our ATS system, which I did. And then 3 weeks later, I got an email saying, you're not a good fit. Sorry, like, go away. And that, and, the kind of emotion, I just felt like, and then they're like, please give us feedback about our hiring process. And it's like, the emotion that generated is like, can I trust you guys with like, your human was good, and that was really good. You reached out and did that work, but you wasted that recruiter's time because your ATS was not smart enough to actually, couldn't handle that level of nuance that, yes, we're looking for someone who has this experience, but we're also, differently looking for this other thing, which isn't obvious. We're hiring for it's like the non-obvious. And HR people don't fully understand the technical details of all the fields, especially now we get into machine learning and you know uh, roles like live ops or ML ops or something like these
Mhm.
new specialized kind of roles. They might not understand the nuance of, and a lot of these are transitional roles. We're in this huge transition of skill shifting
Mhm.
right now, especially with tech. And so you may, you know, this person might be the right person. I just hired someone recently who was like, I just had the absolutely great experience, but could HR see that? Not at all, and so it's really important.
Mhm.
Yeah, emotion is it's there, and it's really important that you actually design for it, and not just let it happen randomly.
Mhm. Uh, as we are having a couple of minutes left, I want to turn it a little bit now in. What do you think could HR learn from their own product teams they have in-house or from product teams prototyping products and services? And how could they iterate that into their own needs and turn it into their own value for the HR organization?
I think this is the great opportunity, Rudy, is like the idea that HR can actually partner and take more of a product mindset or more of a product service experience mindset. You're looking at things, looking at experiences across journeys, like looking at the impact of policies or decisions, or even we talked about like that ATS and I feel like in a couple of years from now, we'll be dealing with those ATSs will be retired and they will be true LLMs. Some of the vendors are sort of saying they're offering that, but for the most part, the technology hasn't evolved. Those processes, that opportunity to work with, I don't know if it's having their own product team. I don't know if it's or more partnering with the rest of the organization. I feel like this is what's missing, I think, from HR is like I feel like HR is stuck in the same way that e-commerce got stuck in a funnel mentality. So essentially like get them through the funnel. Like that was e-commerce in the early days. Like what I started noticing when I worked with e-commerce was it was more important to support people earlier on, making the right decision with their purchase, and then when it came to the funnel, they go through quickly if you support them up front. But that takes like a journey view, and I feel like it's the same with a candidate is like that whole process of engaging and interviewing, but then also moving through their experience of once they're hired, like being able to support, do they feel like you know do they feel like they belong there? Do they feel like they're growing with a company, that they have the opportunities? What does that look like across generations with Gen Z coming through and their expectations and how they differ, and how does that process shape to those expectations and that experience, so that you're not making HR decisions from last decade, but you're making HR decisions that are flexible enough that they can evolve into the future, in the next 5-10 years, along with technology systems, as well.
I know it's nearly impossible without this question. Anyhow, so if you have to recommend one tool or working methodology from service design to HR to probably start using immediately, what would it be?
I think you mentioned a journey map earlier. I think that's a really good one. We basically in service design we start with journey maps, and then we create service blueprints,
Mhm.
which then explains how the thing's going to evolve from what we call front stage to backstage, from the customer
Mhm.
employee and then down to the systems back end. But
Mhm.
the journey is it's a literal document, but it's also like a mentality that you actually, when you make a decision, you say, oh, at what stage in the journey are we talking about here? What are we supporting, across time? And so I think the journey map, I would say, would be like the good kind of like grounding document, and then evolving into a service blueprint.
Mhm. And if you look into the future, do you think employee experience will become a discipline of its own within HR departments?
Yeah, I think it maybe. I think it depends on how well HR professionals understand the opportunity, and if they move into this more, strategic alignment with, employee experience. There's an opportunity to do that. I think it's going to require like a like, as you're almost like suggesting like an inclusion of tools like a journey map or of processes, sort of product or service thinking, understanding how experiences work, essentially sprinkling UX into HR processes. But yeah, I think there's a possibility that could be the case. And it may come from a technology driven type of approach, where we have like, we're able to sort of use analytics to monitor an employee experience across time. And then all of a sudden that immediately brings a journey view. It immediately starts getting you focusing on different stages and touch points. So that may be a way to come into it. But yeah, it's an exciting thought, I think, for the future, for sure.
And the last question that's in my head now is, do you personally differentiate between, I mean, all companies that I know measure employee satisfaction in a way, either once a year or 2 times a year or 3 times a year. Do you distinguish between measuring employee satisfaction and employee experience? Or is it the same?
Yeah, I think satisfaction is definitely part of it, but I think with experience, metrics, we go a little deeper, so because it's not just about are you satisfied. It's sort of like that. It's sort of like the car rental example analogy that I was giving earlier is like are you satisfied? And it's like, well, yes. I mean, I got my car and I'm satisfied with it, but what about onboarding? Were you satisfied with that? Nah, they had some issues. Why did I have to wait so long? And then, so, I think CSAT is just a high level, cover your backside kind of metric. But I think, with experience, you can go a lot deeper and measure like more nuanced aspects of an employee's experience for sure.
Really cool. I want to end up with a quick this or that round with you. So I throw some words and topics towards you and ask you to pick one of the 2 that they offer you quick without thinking too much. And the first one I think is easy. It's journey maps or org charts.
Oh, journey maps.
Prototype first or strategy first?
Ooh. Oh, probably prototype first, but strategy is important.
Yeah. Design thinking or operational excellence?
Oh, I'm not sure I can do that. I would say operational excellence, actually, because design thinking can be misused.
Employee as customer or employee as a partner?
Well, employee as I would say employee as a partner.
Data or intuition?
Oh. I mean, you need both. So, let's go with clean data.
Okay.
Just to break them.
Technology-led transformation or human-led transformation?
Human-led transformation, yeah.
Okay, Doc. And the last question that I ask all my guests is, if Aladdin with his magic lamp would show up at you now and would say, Frank, I give you one wish for free, what would it be?
That people make better decisions when they're in positions of influence when it comes to technology, when it comes to customer experience, like kind of what we started with, a basic question. Understand that that's a powerful position, and then, make the best of it.
Really, really cool. Thank you so much for your time, Frank. It was a pleasure. Thank you for this inspirational conversation. There's a spoiler at the end. We are now trying to bring Frank to Berlin, to our World Congress in Berlin in July, because I think it's really worth having a workshop or a keynote or whatever on stage there, because that definitely brings a lot of value, because I think this collaborational understanding of working together without silos, and I think we all have guys in the teams that know a lot, and I think it's my old grandma always said, it's just a question of communication, and communication brings people together. And I think that's probably a solution for our complex world and getting even more complex. So I'm really looking forward. Hope we can manage it, but we're on a good track. So for the audience, if you want to see Frank live on stage, World Congress Berlin could be a good chance to do. And Frank, thank you very much for your time once again, and thank you for giving us so many insights.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Rudi. It's been a
Goodbye.
pleasure. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Cappuccino with HR. If you enjoy this kind of conversations, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Then you get all this kind of upfront information, your upcoming episodes, and all my nice guests. Cappuccino with HR is brought to you by We Are Developers, Europe's #1 developer community and a leading platform for connecting HR and companies together with developers. If you want to learn more, visit us on wearedevelopers.com. Thank you again for watching and see you next time on Cappuccino with HR.